Brexit was sold as freedom, but freedom isn't free, and it rarely comes with instructions. Some people still swear Brexit saved the UK from decline, while others argue it quietly rewired the country's economy, politics, and daily life in ways no one fully explained. Here's the uncomfortable paradox. Brexit gave Britain more control, yet made many outcomes harder to control. And whether you supported it or not, you're living with the results right now, at the checkout, at work, and in the UK's global standing. Most discussions stop at slogans or surface-level blame games. That's a mistake. The real Brexit Impact UK story isn't about winners versus losers. It's about trade-offs, unintended consequences, and long-term shifts beneath short-term noise. The Brexit economy, inflation pressures, job shortages, and political fragmentation didn't appear out of thin air. They formed slowly, like stress fractures in concrete, easy to ignore until they start shaping how everything moves. In this video, the goal isn't propaganda or nostalgia, it's clarity. You'll see how the UK economy after Brexit actually changed, why Brexit consequences hit some people harder than others, and what the post-Brexit future could realistically look like. Stay until the end, because the final question might flip how you think about Brexit entirely, not as a finished decision, but as a story still being written. Back in 2016, Brexit didn't feel like a technical policy choice. It felt like a gut decision. The promise was simple and powerful. Take back control, restore sovereignty, protect borders, and free the UK from Brussels rules. For many voters, the Brexit Impact UK debate wasn't about spreadsheets. It was about identity, fairness, and the sense that decisions were being made too far away. Politicians sold Brexit as a reset button for the Brexit economy, a way to reclaim independence and unlock growth. It sounded like finally cutting loose a safety rope that had turned into a leash, and in moments of frustration, that message landed hard. But here's where reality quietly stepped in. Leaving the EU wasn't a clean break. It was more like moving out of a shared house after 40 years. Everything, from electricity to groceries, suddenly needed renegotiation. The UK economy after Brexit didn't crash overnight, but it didn't sprint forward either. Growth slowed compared to similar advanced economies, and uncertainty became a constant background noise. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, UK long-term productivity is expected to be around 4% lower than if Brexit hadn't happened, a key Brexit consequence often ignored during the campaign. The promise was control, yet the trade-offs started stacking up fast. From a geopolitical expert's lens, this gap between promise and reality is where the real story begins. Brexit wasn't a single event, it was a process, messy and ongoing, reshaping UK-EU relations in ways voters never saw on campaign posters. Think of it like quitting a stable job to start a business. Freedom increases, but so does risk, paperwork, and stress. Some sectors hoped to thrive, others braced for impact, and most people just wanted clarity. And that uncertainty set the stage for the next chapter, because once emotions cooled, the economic shockwaves were impossible to ignore. Once Brexit became real policy, not just rhetoric, the Brexit economy entered rougher waters. Trade with the EU, still the UK's largest trading partner, suddenly faced customs checks, paperwork, and regulatory divergence. What used to be a seamless flow of goods turned into delays at borders, higher logistics costs, and missed delivery windows. These Brexit trade effects hit exporters hard, especially small and medium businesses that didn't have compliance teams or legal buffers. For many firms, trading with Europe started to feel like trading with a distant continent overnight. Currency markets reacted faster than politicians. The pound fell sharply after the referendum and never fully recovered, feeding directly into inflation UK through higher import prices. Energy, food, and raw materials became more expensive, squeezing both businesses and households. Between 2021 and 2023, UK inflation consistently ran higher than many peer economies, driven by global shocks but amplified by Brexit frictions. Foreign direct investment also softened as investors hesitated amid unclear rules and future access to EU markets. The UK economy after Brexit didn't collapse, but it clearly lost momentum. London's financial sector offers a perfect case study. The city didn't disappear, but parts of its dominance quietly shifted to Amsterdam, Paris, and Frankfurt. Trillions in euro-denominated trades moved abroad, not out of hostility, but out of regulatory necessity, one of the most concrete Brexit consequences so far. For investors trying to adapt, diversification became key. UK equities paired with global ETFs, exposure to exporters benefiting from a weaker pound, and inflation-hedged assets like commodities or infrastructure funds. The economy was still standing, but the shockwaves were spreading straight into jobs, wages, and daily life. Once the headlines faded, Brexit showed up somewhere more personal, at work, in hospitals, and at the supermarket checkout. Reduced EU migration reshaped the Brexit jobs and labor landscape almost immediately. Sectors that relied heavily on European workers, healthcare, agriculture, construction, and hospitality, started facing chronic shortages. The NHS alone reported tens of thousands of unfilled positions, while farms struggled to harvest crops on time. This wasn't ideology anymore, it was operational reality colliding with policy. Wages did rise in some sectors, but not always in a good way. Higher pay often reflected scarcity, not productivity, and those costs filtered straight into consumer prices. Food became a clear example. Supply chain friction plus labor shortages meant higher prices and occasional gaps on shelves. That fed into inflation, UK, making everyday life more expensive for households already under pressure. A geopolitical analyst might compare it to tightening one bolt in a complex machine. Unexpected vibrations show up elsewhere, and the system groans before it adapts. For individuals trying to stay ahead, adaptation became a survival skill. Workers increasingly turned to reskilling, healthcare training, logistics certifications, digital skills, fields less exposed to migration volatility. Books like The Future of Work by Jacob Morgan or The 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari became practical guides, not abstract reads. The Brexit Impact UK wasn't just about borders, it was about how ordinary people recalibrated their lives. And that human adjustment fed directly into politics, power, and the UK's global standing. Brexit didn't just redraw trade rules, it cracked open the UK's political foundation. Leadership turnover became the norm, not the exception, as governments struggled to manage the Brexit political impact. Parliament grew more polarized, public trust thinned, and long-term strategy often gave way to short-term survival. Internally, tensions intensified. Scotland reignited independence debates, Northern Ireland wrestled with border complexities, and Wales questioned its economic footing. The Brexit UK impact became as much constitutional as economic. On the global stage, the shift was subtle but significant. Outside the EU, the UK gained autonomy but lost collective leverage. Trade negotiations with the US, Australia, and Asian partners moved slower than promised, often delivering symbolic wins, not transformational ones. Meanwhile, UK-EU relations became transactional, less partnership, more paperwork. A seasoned geopolitical observer might say the UK traded a front-row seat in Europe's decision room for a voice in the hallway, still heard, but less decisive. Strategically, Britain now had to work harder to project influence. Soft power, finance, diplomacy, culture remained strong, but harder to convert into concrete outcomes. Think of it like leaving a powerful alliance in a multiplayer game. Freedom increases, but so does risk, vulnerability, and stress. For policymakers and investors, following institutions like Chatham House or reading The Road to Somewhere by David Goodhart became essential to understand where power was really shifting. And with influence recalibrated, the big question emerged: what does the post-Brexit future actually look like? Looking ahead, the post-Brexit future isn't stone cold. It's more like a rough draft full of crossed-out lines. Some analysts see Brexit as a long-term drag on growth, pointing to weaker productivity and ongoing trade friction. Others argue it's a painful transition phase where short-term losses could give way to regulatory flexibility and niche advantages. The truth probably sits somewhere in between, with the UK economy after Brexit slowly adapting rather than dramatically reinventing itself. History suggests countries don't reset overnight, they evolve, often unevenly. One possible path is selective divergence, lighter regulation in areas like fintech, AI, and biotech, where speed matters more than scale. Another is pragmatic cooperation, quietly rebuilding closer UK-EU relations without reopening old political wounds. Trade diversification also matters, but geography still rules economics. Distant markets rarely replace nearby ones entirely, a lesson reinforced by ongoing Brexit trade effects. From an investment standpoint, this favors long-term themes: infrastructure upgrades, export-oriented firms, and education-driven productivity. Funds focused on innovation or UK mid-cap exporters often benefit from a weaker pound and global exposure. At a deeper level, Brexit forced the UK to ask uncomfortable questions about identity, power, and expectations. Was it a mistake or simply an unfinished project sold too early? The Brexit consequences are real, but so is the capacity to adjust. Nations do it all the time. Think of it like rebuilding a plane mid-flight. Risky, exhausting, but not impossible. And that unresolved tension leaves one final question hanging. Will the UK redefine success on its own terms, or keep measuring itself against what it left behind? Brexit isn't just something that happened to the UK. It's something the country is still responding to every single day. Understanding the Brexit impact UK means recognizing patterns, how trade friction shapes prices, how labor shortages affect services, and how political choices ripple into the economy. Knowledge here isn't abstract, it's practical. It helps you read headlines differently, make smarter career decisions, and even think more clearly about investments, savings, and long-term plans in a shifting Brexit economy. The most important takeaway is this: outcomes aren't fixed. The UK economy after Brexit can stagnate, adapt, or reinvent itself depending on policy choices, innovation, and public pressure. That's why staying informed matters. Follow credible economic data, read across perspectives, and question simple narratives because complex problems never have one-line answers. Brexit's consequences reward those who think long-term, not emotionally. So now the real conversation begins. Was Brexit a strategic mistake, a necessary correction, or simply an unfinished experiment? How should the UK redefine success in its post-Brexit future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if you want to keep learning how geopolitics, economics, and power shape your everyday life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The story doesn't end here. It's just getting interesting.